mostly Joanne, my friend. He was married to her, so I had to visit when they were in Madagascar and Tanzania. And then after she died, my first husband had died. Had been some time, but yeah. Leaning. You had to say that in your interview. You're grumping at me. Oh no, he remembers it different now. We're coming back on that.
You had to answer the question, or you're gonna have to answer it the way they want it. They asked me. But pretty much a piece of work.
You're not a war.
No, but I said
It was a
when it comes to defending yourself, I would defend myself. Were some Mennonites, they were located in Russia once, and the local bandits were raiding the village. And finally, some of the residents said, enough of this, let's defend ourselves. And they still question whether they should have defended themselves or not. They were pacifists to that level. So,
I went to orientation in Lancaster.
they're associated with the Amish, the Mennonites and the Amish.
And that's why, I was, one of my cultural awakenings was watching.
Are we good to go?
Kids, we were kids, looking out windows, taking pictures of the Amish.
So, give me a 3, 2, 1 or something. Some Mennonites are,
Brian, let me know when you want to start.
there's a wide spectrum from the old order Mennonites, which are basically Amish.
You want us looking at that camera?
General Conference, which is like us, So, General Conference is over.
That one?
That's what I was told.
That one doesn't look like it's Abbas. This camera. It's in the fine print. Huh? So we await he who must be obeyed. So.
Don't feed his ego.
It's a joke. Good afternoon and welcome to Aging Splendidly, you who are here. Standing room only crowd, good to see. And people who either watch us live or at a later time. It's my pleasure to introduce Stan Trollip, a friend. He grew up in South Africa, was educated in United States, became a professor at the University of Minnesota. I believe computer science, having airline pilots learn on computer or something like that. Then he retired. Got a job, CEO of Capella University. Then he retired. Then he decided he'd write a book, then another book, and so forth. So, one thing for sure, he hasn't figured out how to retire yet. But other than that, I met him on a golf course. He and my good golf buddy are squash competitors. And so they got to know each other, and they both play golf. And so we have met on the golf course. And he's Bobby Locke II, just so you know, if you're going to play on the golf course, hang on to your wallet. So, Stan.
Well, thank you very much. He exaggerated everything, just to put things into perspective, but thank you very much for that introduction. If you'd asked me, let's see, 22 years ago, would I be standing in front of you now, talking about books, I would have said absolutely not. It never entered my head in the late 1900s, etc., that I would become a mystery novelist. And surprisingly, the thanks go to a pack of hyenas. Every summer, I would go back to, I was a professor here at the U of M, I would go back to South Africa, and being a private pilot, I would rent a small plane, get my friends, and we would go bird watching and game watching in Botswana and Zimbabwe. On one of those trips, in the Savuti Plains of the Great Chobe National Park in Botswana, we saw a pack of hyenas hunting and killing a wildebeest. Now, hyenas are generally scavengers, but when they're hungry, they are ferocious hunters. And in about 3.5 hours, the wildebeest had disappeared. The hyenas eat the flesh and the bones. My friend Michael Sears and I, both readers of mysteries at the time, said, aha, if we ever need to get rid of a body, there you are. You've got a perfect disposal system. Both of us were professors. He was of mathematics. I was sort of computer science and education. And so being academics, we didn't do things very quickly. And about 15 years later, we started writing a book because that is a beautiful premise for a book. But the question is that we found out is that it's not a story. It's just a beautiful scene, and it's a good way to kick a story off. And so it took us 3 years to write our first book, which we were writing for ourselves because we thought, can we do it? We read all these other ones, some really good, some not so good. You know, can we do it? And we discovered that, in fact, having a hyena eating a body is a good way to start a book, which is how our first book, A Carrion Death, starts, but it's not a story. You've got to explore who the body was, because a hyena, a professor of ecology and a game ranger discover a body that hasn't been completely devoured by a hyena. And it is obvious that the body has been murdered. The person has been murdered because the teeth have been knocked out and so on. So the story becomes, why was that person there? Who is the person? Why was the person murdered? And that's what the whole story becomes. So thank you, hyenas. So we've been very lucky. We were lucky to see that. I'm not sure we would have written a book had we not seen that. And it took us 3 years to finish it. We didn't know what we were doing. The second piece of luck was we were told that we should write what we know. And both of us being professors, that's why a professor of ecology was in chapter 1 and discovering this body with the game ranger. He was going to be our main character. Didn't work out. When you find a body that's clearly been murdered, you have to call the police. So they called the Botswana police, and from Gaborone, the capital, probably 500 kilometers, 300 miles away, they sent a detective. David Bengu is his name. His nickname is Kubu, which I'll come back to in a moment. And Kubu's a large man. Well, the nickname, the word means hippopotamus in the local language, and it was an affectionate nickname for him, not a derogatory one. Anyway, he jumps into his Land Rover in Gaborone, the capital, drives into the Central Kalahari Game Reserve to where the body is. And by the time he reached the body, he had become the main character. He told us, you can't have a professor as a main character in a murder mystery. It's me. I'm the detective. I'm the smartest detective in Botswana. And I mean, it sounds trite, but the reality is we had no intention of him being the main character. And by the time he reached the body, he had taken over. So first bit of luck with the hyenas. Second bit of luck is Kubu decided that he was going to be the main character. So we finished the book, called it A Carrion Death, and we read it, of course, and our friends read it, and they all said they really liked it. And of course, you always purr the opinion of friends on what you write, because they're always going to say they like it. But they were actually quite persistent. They said, I think you should really try and get this published. So we tried a few publishers in South Africa and got nowhere. And I was living here in Minneapolis, working at the U at the time. And so I went over to the Loft. The Loft is, you may know it, it's a wonderful writers' guild over on Washington. And I took some courses in how to find an agent, and wrote query letters and got about, I don't know, 35, 40 rejections. And it was a little depressing. Most writers are depressed at some stage. And I was at a dinner party talking to some friends, and one of them was a published mystery writer. Judy Healy is her name, a lovely writer, mainly of historic mysteries. And she said, oh, I've got an agent in New York. She's not taking any more authors at the moment, but I'll ask her what's going on. Anyway, the agent, who's Minnesotan, actually Minneapolis, Marley Russoff is her name. She ran a bookstore on Snelling and University a long time ago. Anyway, she said, I've got some hangers-on, wannabe agents. I'll give them a couple of chapters to see. They were just sloughing me off. That's what they do. So the wannabe agent read a few chapters and wrote back to me and said, I'm really enjoying this. Can you send the whole manuscript? So I sent the whole manuscript to the wannabe, and about 3 weeks later, Marley called me and said, we'd like to represent you. So clearly the wannabe had persuaded Marley to read the book, and she liked it well enough. About 3 or 4 weeks after that, I got a phone call in Minneapolis from Marley, and she said, HarperCollins wants to buy your book. HarperCollins? And I was... And so, I sort of fell off the chair and, didn't have anything. And she said, no, don't worry. I know you want more than that. She had given me a number that had startled me. And it's not that I was quiet because I was wanting more. I was quiet because I was shocked. We would have paid HarperCollins to publish it. Anyway, she thought I was sort of pushing it back. She said, don't worry, I'll get more. A couple of weeks later, she came back and she said, they've upped their offer by 50%. Now this is getting to be real money. And you are writing a series, aren't you? Of course, Marley. And she said, well, they would like to see a synopsis of the second book next week, please. So Michael and I, he was in South Africa, I was here. We created a synopsis in a week and sent it in, and they bought a 2-book. They gave us a 2-book contract, which was mind-boggling. As a little aside, the 1-week synopsis is the closest to the finished book than anything else we've done. It actually turned out to be a very good synopsis. There are 2 broad categories of writers, particularly in my field, the mystery thriller field. There are those like Jeffrey Deaver, who you may have read, who are what we call plotters. And they spend a lot of time creating a very detailed outline of the whole book. And Jeffrey, I was speaking to him recently, and he said, it can take me 3 or 4 months to get the outline right, and it can be 120 pages long. And then all I have to do is go and fill in the detail. The other type of writer is called a pantser, somebody who writes by the seat of their pants. We are pantsers. And what that means is that you don't have a clear idea of what's going on. You don't have a nice ending all sorted out before you start writing. We sort of believe that it's unfair that readers get towards the end of the book and they're getting excited and they don't know who done it, and they want to. That's unfair, We want the same feeling. We want to get towards the end of the book while we are writing and not know who's going to be the bad person. and it literally is that way. We got to the end of the 4th book, Deadly Harvest, and we couldn't catch the bad guy. We had made him so clever and so just nasty and that we couldn't figure out how to actually catch him. And we went backwards and forwards, and it took about a month, and suddenly we realized one sentence changed in the book could let us catch him. But we literally were worried that we would have to abandon most of the book because all the clues that we had set up were there, but we couldn't. They weren't really pointing to him. So anyway, I write with a friend, Michael Sears. We've now written 8 in the Detective Kubu series. The 2 of them have been very nicely acknowledged for us. The 3rd one, Death of the Mantis, the backstory of that is the plight of the Bushmen in South Africa, and I'll come back to that briefly, was a finalist in the last 5 for a very prestigious award in this country called the Edgar. It's we didn't win it, but we were absolutely thrilled to be a finalist. And then the 4th book, Deadly Harvest, the one whose nasty guy we couldn't catch originally, it was a finalist in a very prestigious award in the thriller world from the international thriller writers. We were, I think, in the last 6 or 7, something like that. So we've been very lucky to that Kubu decided to take over, because it's no doubt that Kubu is the person who has attracted our readers to our books. I said I'd come back to Death of the Mantis about the Bushmen. The Bushmen are a fascinating group of people, or multiple groups of people in southern Africa, widely regarded as the oldest descendants of us on the planet. And a lot of DNA analyses from around the world lead to northern Namibia, northern Botswana area. They've had a terrible time, as people of sort of Aboriginal descent have had in this country, in Australia, in South Africa particularly. They've been sort of pushed aside, marginalized, both by black groups coming south out of Central Africa and white groups coming north from Cape Town and so on. And we've always been really interested in those groups of people, not only because of them being marginalized, but of a whole set of skills and beliefs that they have. And we found as we were doing a lot of research on them that the last license to hunt Bushmen was issued in 1936. So they were literally treated as animals. They're an amazing people, and the Death of the Mantis is about a mythical place that the Bushmen call the birthplace of mankind. There is a real place in Botswana called Sodillo Hills that the Bushmen call the birthplace of humankind. but we created a second place just for the fiction called The Place. And the main character, other than Kubu, the main Bushman character is intent on preserving the Bushman traditions. And so that's the sort of backstory. After 6 books, we suddenly realized that we didn't know very much about Kubu as a young man, because in our first book, A Carrion Death, he emerged as an assistant superintendent in the criminal investigation department. And that's a fairly senior rank. So we decided to write a couple of prequels going back to when he started. And so we wrote a book called Facets of Death, which opens on his first day as a detective. You can tell by the title, it's probably about diamonds. It is. Botswana has the 2 richest diamond mines in the world, Orapa and Jwaneng. And this book is set in around Jwaneng, which in reality today mines 100,000 carats of diamonds a day. And that is clearly a temptation for people who are not well behaved. So that's a story about diamonds. Just as an aside, as I was saying at the table over there, a few weeks ago, or maybe a month ago, in a mine just north of Gaborone, they found a diamond of 2,500 carats, gem quality, the second largest diamond ever found. The biggest one was in Pretoria, just near Johannesburg, in the 1800s or early 1900s, called the Cullinan diamond, many of whose stones are in the royal crowns and scepters and so on. So there are lots of big diamonds still lying around. The second prequel is called A Deadly Covenant, and it too involves the Bushmen. There's a guy up in the northwest of Botswana digging a trench for a pipe with a backhoe, and he unearths a skeleton. And it turns out that it's not a baboon. There are plenty of baboons around there, so not unlikely. But it's clearly a human skeleton, so they have to bring in the police. And so Kubu, still very new in the police force, and the forensic pathologist, Ian McGregor from Scotland, go up just to sort out that. They both expect to have it all done and dusted, in a few days, because skeletons become skeletons after a long time, especially in a very dry climate. This is all set in the Kalahari Desert. But when they get there and do a little further investigation, it turns out that there are 9 skeletons, and they're all of Bushmen, men, women, and kids, and they've all been murdered. So suddenly just a normal little, what's going on type of visit becomes a major issue as to when this happened, who did it, why, and it's sort of propelled forward in the eyes of the police by a very senior elder of that local tribe being murdered shortly after the police arrived there. So that's the story on that one. So those are the Kubu books. What's the timeline? Just need to...
We shut everything down at 1:30, so
Oh, okay, right.
until 1:20 and we'll...
I'll have questions long before that. While we were writing the books, and I think it was probably after the 4th or the 5th one, I don't remember, Michael and I decided that we should write something very different. We didn't want to become stale. And those of you who are avid readers may have found that people who write long series sometimes get a little stale, that the books get a little formulaic and so on. And we just didn't want that to happen to us. So we said, well, we're going to try something completely different. We're going to challenge ourselves. So we decided to write a book about rhino poaching and rhino horn smuggling. Most of the rhinos in the world are in South Africa, and it's a huge problem. And as a protagonist, we decided we would have a young Vietnamese woman whose family were refugees after the Vietnam War, who then settled here in Minneapolis. And she's now grown up and is a young investigative journalist at a TV station in Duluth. And the story doesn't matter, but she ends up persuading the National Geographic to send her to South Africa to finish a story on rhino poaching and rhino horn smuggling that was commissioned by the National Geographic. But the writer, the journalist who was down there, has disappeared. So they send her. She happens to have a sort of a slight side interest in him romantically, although that hasn't come to anything at the time. So she has a double interest. She wants to enhance her professional reputation by doing a good job of the story, and she hopes that while she's there, she will find out something about rhinos and find him. She gets in way over her head. People don't really understand what that rhino trade is all about. If you think that one mature rhino horn has a street value of between $400,000 and $500,000, that amount of money means you cannot trust anybody involved. So she gets down there. She doesn't know whether to trust the people who are farming rhinos and trying to save them. She doesn't know whether to trust the police. She doesn't know, and she gets into a lot of trouble. Now, it was very convenient, obviously we had control over this, that she was Vietnamese, since the largest consumer of rhino horns is Vietnam. And so she's able to go to Vietnam and fit in with the local population. Now, it's over there, it's called Dead of Night, but which was our original title. And our American publisher didn't like Dead of Night. She thought that the title was far too tame for the contents of the book. So she asked us to come up with something much stronger. And we struggled and we struggled and we struggled. And eventually I suggested to Michael, I don't think he liked it, but he said yes, okay. I suggested that we propose to the publisher that they title the book, and please forgive me, Shoot the Bastards. Okay? And the reason why I thought of that is when a poacher is caught in southern Africa, the general population say just that. You know, who cares about trials? Just shoot the bastard. I don't agree with the sentiment, but that was the title here. But I don't think it was one that attracted a lot of people, but so we've changed the title back to Dead of Night. While we were writing Dead of Night, as I said, we challenged ourselves, and not only was there a challenge of a female protagonist, and also we also put it in the first person, which is a lovely voice to write in, but it's extremely difficult because you can't have chapters and scenes where the protagonist is missing. And we wrote up a pretty decent 20,000 words, and then we ran into a brick wall and couldn't figure out what to do. So we wrote another Kubu book, and then went back to Dead of Night, or it was Dead of Night at the time, and put it in a third person close, which is sort of a bit like first person, but gives you a little more freedom. And wrote away to 20,000 words and ran into the same brick wall. So we wrote another Kubu book and then came back. And while we were, before we came back, I said to Michael, I said, I think the problem we have is the book is really in the first person, both ways you write it. And you have to be in Crystal Nguyen is the protagonist's name, Crystal's head, and I have to be in Crystal's head. And I don't think that's really working because we don't really know who Crystal is. So I said, let me write a few chapters, a few stories to try and tease out her character, which I did, and we read it and tried again, and this time it clicked. We wrote it in just ordinary third person, and we were able to then completely finish the book, which then came out as Dead of Night in the Rest of the World, and the other title here. Then COVID came, and I was twiddling my thumbs in Cape Town under COVID and a very severe lockdown in South Africa. And I said, I have some chapters about Crystal on my computer that I wrote to try and understand her. So one of the products of COVID for me was I took all of those and wrote a separate story about Crystal, all set in the north woods of Minnesota, about the endangered grey wolves, and published it under my name as Wolfman. So I have a solo book as well as the other books. And you'll also see on the table there, we've written a lot of short stories, but we have also, we also with another friend created an anthology of short stories called Sunshine Noir. And it came about because this other friend, Anna Maria Alfieri, and I were at a conference in Reykjavik, Iceland Noir, mystery writer conference. And Anna Maria and I were getting a little irked by how proud all the Scandinavian authors were about how great their writing was. Their writing is great, okay? I acknowledge it, but you don't actually have to bandy it about. It's very un-Scandinavian to do that. and we would say, that's ridiculous. If you read Yrsa Sigurdardóttir, you must read her, great writer out of Iceland. She kills more people in one book than people are murdered in Iceland in a decade. I mean, you have to think how ridiculous it is. In the depths of winter, how can you go out and murder somebody? Okay, Dave, I want to murder Dave. Okay, I'm going to go and murder Dave. I get up, I've got to put on about 18 layers of clothes and anoraks and muklaks and trudge through the snow, knock on Dave's door, you dirty, rotten and then I've got to take all that off before I kill him. It's just not going to happen. So we said, really bad things happen in hot climates. So we said, there's an interesting idea. Why don't we create a new sort of subgenre called Sunshine Noir? And we invited 17 very, very good writers from around the world who set their novels in hot places and asked them to write a short story. And so Sunshine Noir was the product of that. And what is really nice is we quite often now see in reviews, etc., of books, not necessarily our own books, that they are being categorized as, here's a wonderful example of Sunshine Noir. Questions? You must have some questions. Yes.
Continue with the protagonist?
I think so. We're in the middle of the 9th Kubu book at the moment. So we need to finish that first, and then we'll make a decision on that. I really like Crystal myself. I think she's a very interesting character. So, somebody here had a hand up? Yeah.
I was wondering about your research, that you couldn't have known everything about all your
No.
before you started writing?
Yeah, I mean, both Michael and I are professors by profession originally, so research is, just part of our DNA, if you like. And we really enjoy the research almost as much as the writing. And so we spend a lot of time doing that research. We've been to Botswana many, many times. I've got to tell you one story which I think is probably very rare in the world of mystery writing. We were in Gaborone, the capital. We'd been desperately trying to arrange a meeting with the director of the criminal investigation department, the head of the detectives, because we needed to talk to somebody about the procedures. We could read about them and so on, but we really needed to talk to somebody. And I kept pestering him, and he didn't answer. And we were in Gaborone doing some last research for a carrion death, and I phoned up, and he eventually said, "You've worn me out. I will meet you on Saturday at noon at your hotel." And so he came, and it was such an interesting guy. He was taller than I was, cowboy boots, big cowboy hat, and he took us, spent the whole afternoon with us, telling us about the Botswana Police Service, about the detectives, and so on. And somewhere in the middle of that, he said, "You have to write a book about something I'm going to tell you about." And what he told us about was something called Muti murders. Now, when I was a kid, let's say I needed to take cough mixture or something, my mother would say, "Go and take your Muti." Muti is a sort of a local term for medicine. A Muti murder is a murder committed by, I'll use the word witch doctor, it's not a word that's used in Southern Africa, but a witch doctor, in order to satisfy the requests of usually a rich or powerful person. So, for example, a rich woman may not be able to bear kids, may be infertile. She may go to a witch doctor and say, "Look, I've been trying to have kids, nothing's working, can you help me?" And the witch doctor will say, "Of course I can help you." It'll be some very large amount of money. And what he would do is he would go out, find a very attractive young girl, murder her, harvest the sex organs, and create a magic potion from those sex organs. This is true. This happens. And it is still happening in sub-Saharan Africa. And then that potion goes to the client. So the director said, "I want you to write a book about this because we, the police, never solve those murders, ever." So, of course, we asked why, and he said there are 3 reasons why those murders are never solved. The first reason is that almost every murder, anywhere in the world, the perpetrator and the victim know each other. There's some connection between them. A love connection, a money connection, some connection. People very rarely just go out and kill somebody at random. So the police cannot ever find a connection between these 2 people. The second reason is that the police are very scared of finding the witch doctor, because the witch doctor will put a spell on them. And they're very afraid of the spell. And it's very easy for those of us in the West to say, "Pah!" Yeah, the reality is those spells can be extremely powerful because it's not a physical spell, it's a psychological spell. And people who believe strongly enough that a witch doctor has come along and put a spell on them can get very ill, and sometimes they can die. So people don't want to mess with the witch doctors. And then the third reason is that the client of the witch doctor is almost always somebody who's powerful or rich, because they wouldn't be able to afford the muti. So the director said, I would love you to write a book about that so that more people understand what's going on. And so the fourth book we wrote, called Deadly Harvest, is about Muti murders. And it's based on a true story. In 1996, I think it was, just north of Gaborone in a little town called Machudi, a young girl, what's her? Segametsi Mochomotsi was her name, was murdered and sex organs harvested, and the local population, of course, were angry and got increasingly angry as the police did nothing. And eventually there were big protests, and if I remember correctly, a couple of the protesters were killed by the police because it was getting quite violent. And eventually the government stepped in and said, okay, we will investigate this independently, and we will invite Scotland Yard, the Metropolitan Police from London, to come and do an independent investigation, which they did. And this was, remember, the end of the 1900s. To this day, that report has not been released. So I think there's a message there somewhere. So it's been terrific being able to do the research. One of the amazing things to me is that if you go up to people, the commissioner of police, this, that, and that, you say, I'm a writer, and you show some credentials and say, I need your help. It's amazing how helpful people are. It's just incredible. One other little story. There's up in the north of Botswana, a little town called Kasane. We set a story there, and one of the people in the story get arrested and is going to be interrogated in the police station. And so we were up there, and we wanted to go and see what the police station was like and what the interrogation rooms were like, and so on. And we had been encouraged to do that, or by the commissioner of police for the whole country, whom we had a meeting the previous week. And so we went there, and we walked into the station commander's office and said, I'm Stan Trollip and Michael Sears, and we write books about blah, blah, blah. Here's our card. We would very much like to see your interrogation rooms as research for our next book. He wasn't buying this. He said, what do you mean? He said, no. I'm not going to do that. I said, but, the commissioner of police told us we could do this. And of course, he thought I was, yeah. So he said, prove it. So I took out my cell phone, and I had the commissioner's number. I called it, and I said, Commissioner? I'm very lucky that he answered. The station commander here is giving us some problem about seeing the interrogation rooms. Could you just speak to him, please? And that opened every door. But it's amazing how all of that comes together. Yeah. Any other sort of questions, etc.? Yeah.
I'd like to know how you collaborate.
I can't read that.
Just repeat the question.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to know how you collaborate with another writer. Are you in the same room sharing ideas? Do you do a chapter and your partner does a chapter? How do you coordinate that?
Right. The question is, how do two people write together, basically? My normal tongue-in-the-cheek response is that that's the wrong question. I'm going to answer it anyway. But the right question is, how can anybody write alone? Okay, so let me answer that question. So the procedure, if you like, for writing together, the way we write together, and there are different ways people collaborate. We both do everything. So we start always we are physically together, usually in South Africa, when we are thinking about the next book. As I said, we don't outline it but we have the background, we have a sense. We usually know what some of the crimes are going to be. We start brainstorming about, who the red herrings are, who the different people are who may have done the dastardly deed. And then I may say, well, I have a really interesting idea how to start this book. So let me write the first piece, and the piece may be a chapter, a couple of chapters, half a chapter. And Michael at the same time will say, well, I have an idea also for something else. So typically we are both writing at the same time. And so, for example, I may write that piece, and I'll send it to Michael, who's now in South Africa, and I could be here or in Denmark or whatever, and he'll edit it. And while he's editing it, I'm editing his. And an edit can be, that's a good idea, I hadn't thought about it, so maybe that could go in this direction, sort of like a true brainstorming. Or this doesn't work very well, how about? And then this piece over here is just terrible, just take it out. And inevitably, and this is very strange at first, now we understand it, is that any time I write a piece, or a small piece of which I'm particularly fond, or Michael writes a piece of which he is particularly fond, the other person thinks it's rubbish. And in the field, it's called, you need always to shoot your darlings. If you love a piece you've written, the chances are you're the only one. That it doesn't fit the story. You've just fallen in love with something that you've written. So they go, and then we rework it, and it go back. And sometimes they can go back and forwards 15, 20 times. So it's a slower process, I think, than writing alone. But it is so much more fun. You've got somebody to brainstorm with, have a glass of wine together when you're together, to critique each other, to give you a kick in the pants if you are slacking. I've written a book by myself, The Wolfman, and having somebody to bounce ideas off, etc., is terrific. So that's the general style, and it works for us. But there's some things that have to be in place. You need to have a thick skin, because unlike the time when you ask a friend or a family member to read part of the manuscript, they always come back and say, oh, it's great. You don't want that. You want somebody who will tell you what they really think. And that always involves pain. And that's why you have to have a thick skin. And secondly, you have to trust that when Michael says this is crap, excuse the, he really thinks that, and he's only saying that in order to make the book better. And so you have to have a thick skin and complete trust in your partner. I can't imagine writing like Sue Grafton, 25 books, all by herself. I'd be so bored of myself by then, I think. Yeah.
Do you have some estimate of how many hours it takes to write a book, and an estimate of how many hours you spend marketing the book?
Okay, so there are two questions there. One is, Dave asks, do I have an estimate of how many hours it takes to write a book? And the second question is, how many hours does it take to market a book? It's really hard, because I don't think Michael nor I are very disciplined writers. I have writer friends who get up at 6 in the morning and write until 10 and then do other things. I write when I feel like it. And sometimes that can be a 16 hours continuous without anything. Sometimes there can be 16 days before I write the next piece. So it's not quite as lax as that, but it's pretty close. Because when you have a deadline, you do actually have to finish a book. So in number of hours, I've never thought about that, but it's obviously a lot. Okay, it takes us usually about a year to finish a book. we're not dedicated to it. We're very fortunate that we're both retired and we don't need the money, if you like. I mean, of course, the money is nice and helpful. But if we didn't sell a book for a year, we wouldn't starve, whereas a lot of writers would starve. The marketing side, again, I don't know how many hours, but it's very close to about the same amount of time. And it's the thing that there are parts of it that I love, like this. This is marketing, okay? I love this. I love talking to people. I love talking to book clubs who've read the book and have all these questions. I sometimes learn more about our books from the readers than I do from myself. That part I just love. I don't love having to get out on Facebook or Twitter and toot my own horn or our own horn in order to try and get people attracted to it. There's a middle ground of writing articles for magazines and so on. But all of that is, it's just very time consuming. And, you know, when the book comes out, you know, we'll start 4 months ahead of time probably, maybe 5 months ahead of time to try and start setting up people who would review it. If you go to somebody like Publishers Weekly or the Library Journal or something like that, you need to get your book in there 4 months, 3 months at the latest ahead of time. We don't even have the book finished at that stage, you know. So it's really hard work, and I just don't like the marketing side. But to hire a publicist is very expensive. And there was a huge change in the publishing world in the sort of 2009, 2010 economic downturn. Before that, even for relatively small authors like Michael and myself, the publisher, HarperCollins in our case, and Headline in the UK, put some resources into helping us market. We would go on little book tours and so on like that. That just, for people at our level, it doesn't happen anymore. So virtually all authors these days do all their own marketing. And you can imagine that, you know, I'll use HarperCollins, you know, somebody comes along, an author, let's say Amor Towles, I don't know, Harper's his publisher, and they pay him $1 million upfront money. Guess where the emphasis is on their marketing, HarperCollins marketing? They're going to try and get their $1 million back, because that doesn't get returned if he doesn't sell books. He keeps that. So when a publisher gives out a lot of money, they also then put all their marketing and advertising resources to get that back. So for smaller authors, it's just really hard work these days. We have to do, you know, virtually all of the work ourselves. So I don't have numbers for you, but that's the best I can do. A lot and a lot. Yeah, any other questions or comments?
Yes. One thing.
Yes, sir.
Next month, please come.
Phil Ricovina, our choir member and professional lute player, will be here. He will be playing the lute, and he will be talking to us. So it should be a delight, and bring your friends. We'll decide whether we're going to limit us to 5 tables or we're going to expand. And you have an opportunity. There's a whole lovely collection of wonderful books. The only one that I have some concerns about is Shoot the Bastard, because, you know, I have little kids at home, so.
But I didn't bring that one. I brought Dead of Night.
We've already talked about this, and we said, well, if you get rid of the shoot and rid of the bastard, we can just call it the, and that'll be good enough.
It's a cousin to the social media platform called X.
So anyway, thank you very much. It's a delight to see you, and thank you for the talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
I get introduced to a new history writer.
Well, I went to June. So I do have books here we'd like to get by the autograph. You're a small book.
Have you ever thought of having your detective book track with the numbers?
We did actually, thought we would make it more. But we thought Alexandra would want to do a Paul Smith wouldn't be too happy. Although I've had a number of long talks with him. He's such a nice guy. Yeah. But that would have been fun.